Welcome everyone. Myself, Dr. Praveen Kumar Pathak. I am working as an associate professor in the Department of Geography at Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi. Next important point is of course gross and net migration. So, if you look at 1 year and if you look at the total movement of people within and outside of the country, so accounting for total in and out migration is referred to as gross migration. And the difference between the total number of persons coming to the country and total number of people who are going outside of the country, so this difference is actually refers to the net migration. Then again, internal migration and external migration. Internal migration is nothing but it refers to the movement of people in different states and regions within a country from one place to another place. So for example, in case of India, a lot of people move from northern states to the southern states for different opportunities, and so therefore they may be considered as internal migrant. On the other hand, external or international migration refers to the movement of people from one country to another country on the permanent basis. So in case of India, a lot of people tend to move for better opportunities abroad, for example in Middle East, in North America and Europe. So that may be considered as an example of external or international migration. Now, one of the important point is to remember, there are various factors which are here at play with regard to people making a decision to move or not to move. And so therefore in theory, there are a number of explanations to understand possible drivers of why people tend to choose to move. So there are a set of factors which are actually referred to as push factors, factors that actually push people because of the circumstances at the place of origin, due to which people choose to move out. So this could be economic in nature, it could be social in nature, it could also be environmental in nature. So for example, in India, a lot of states which are economically and demographically not doing well, for example, empowered action group states, for example UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, a lot of people tend to move from these states to other part of the country, in south, in north, in west, and also part of northeastern India. They are basically looking for better livelihood opportunities. So one of the part of the reason for movement of people is because of lack of economic prospects and livelihood at the place of origin, which is actually pushing people in search of better opportunities. Now where they are moving, they don't have a perfect information about the place of destination, but they have some aspiration and they have some basic understanding about place of destination, and they believe that the livelihood opportunity at the place of destination are ample or they are enough where they can make a better life for themselves and their families as compared to their place of origin, and hence they decide to move out from the place of origin to the place of destination. Similarly, many people are moving from the central and the eastern part of India to other part of India for education, for health, seeking health care. So states or regions which are not endowed with quality education and health infrastructure, or maybe because the quality of life in those states is not as good as compared to other part of the country. So because of these reasons, people think about themselves, their family in present, and also about their future prospect, and keeping these permutation and combination, they decide where the prospects of a better quality of life exist, and therefore they decide to move to alternative locations. So these are considered at the place of origin as push factors. And similarly at the place of destinations, the factors which considered as better economic opportunities, better social life, better quality of life are considered as pull factors. And similarly, one thing that I want to emphasize is recently, which is now being considered very important as in push factor, is the environmental stress. A lot of people in the rural areas are finding it very difficult to survive in the hill areas, in the coastal areas, and part of the reason is that because of climate change impacts. So in rural areas, groundwater levels is coming down because of a lot of pressure of agricultural resources. There are many places, for example, if you take case of Maharashtra in the country, The eastern part in Maharashtra, the region called Vidarbha region, has huge scarcity of water, and they face frequent spells of drought. And so what happens, because of these climate stress factors, they have to move to other part of the state. So a lot of people during the summers, when there is a scarcity of water due to extensive drought in the year, the people tend to move to nearby states or within the state to other part of the state where their relatives might be living, or whether there are alternative sources of livelihood exist. So, and this sort of factor, which is this environmental stress, has emerged as a critical factor which is really putting a lot of stress on the livelihood aspects of people in different geographical location, be it plains, be it coastal areas, and also in case of the mountains. And therefore a lot of people are now being pushed because of these environmental stress. And this has emerged as a significant challenge for different countries and various state governments in the country and also outside the country. So therefore, if you take the permutation and combination between push and pull factors, so it's basically the point is the utility of a place, which is nothing but it measures an individual satisfaction with a given condition. If a person believes that at the place of origin the prospects are not as good as compared to some other place, then of course he or she would take the advantages and disadvantages attached at the place of origin and also at the place of destination, and based on this comparative assessment he or she would be in a position to decide what is good for himself or herself and their family members, and therefore decide whether to move and not to move. So there has been a number of considerations which are involved which influence people's decision to actually move to one place or the other places. So this is just a summary of factors which work at the place of origin. For example, with rapid population growth in the rural areas in the developing nations, there is a situation where there is a lot of young people in the population in the villages, and because of this rising young population, they are actually putting a lot of stress on the economic resources at the household level and also at the community level. And so therefore, because of this rapid increasing of population, young people in the rural areas, it means that there aren't enough opportunities as compared to previous times when this young population was not there to meet important social and healthcare needs of these young people, and of course livelihood. So education, health, job security, social security, these are extremely stressed in the areas where population is growing rapidly, and as a result of which, because of large chunk of young people living in these rural areas, most of them have limited or rather very restricted economic opportunities, which means that the rates of unemployment tends to rise in the rural areas. And of course, because there is ample supply of labor force which probably is not very educated and skilled, which means that there will be lower wage rates in the rural areas. And therefore, let's take case of India. A lot of people from rural backgrounds in the rural villages, from the rural settlements, tend to move to other places in the country because of the differential wage rates. Similar qualities of skills and similar qualities of technical know-how, they may be trained, they may not be trained, but because of the same skill but differential wage rates, they tend to move to a place where there are better opportunities. So for example, a person who is working in, say for example in Uttar Pradesh as a construction laborer would be making around 300 to 400 a day. Similar work will be, if he or she works in Delhi or in maybe Kerala, would make about 1,000 rupees per day. So with the same kind of job profile, if a person can make more than double the money, he or she would rather choose to move to the next place than at the place of origin. So therefore, the burden of poverty, the lack of consumption and a low standard of living. So these are also economic constraints that push people to move to opportunities that might exist elsewhere. And finally, often in many societies, because of poor law and order condition, maybe because of governance failures over the years, and civil unrest and political unrest, so which actually makes people believe that their future prospects and of course their present prospects are not going to be very different if they continue to live in the same society where political factors are not very conducive. And so let's take, for example, in African societies or any part of the world where there has been social and political upheaval going on for a long period of time. Let's take case of our South Asia also. We know in our borders a lot of countries which are facing this problem of civil and social and political unrest have not been able to make the kind of progress which, for example, countries such as India, which is a very vibrant democracy and has been doing economically and socially well since last 75 years. So it's largely possible because of robust and strong democratic institutions where you have where people find scope for progress for themselves and their families. And likewise, if you go to Africa, a number of countries, particularly in the sub-Saharan Africa, are facing this problem of civil struggle, where political systems is weak or fragile, which means that because of these weak political systems, economic growth and economic system would not prevail, and it will be very difficult for industries to come up, to cities to thrive, which essentially means that there will be, unfortunately, long spell of destitution and poverty and deprivations. And therefore a lot of people tend to think about if there is any scope to move out and seek opportunity elsewhere. And recently, if you see the case of Afghanistan in southern Asia, where a lot of people from Afghan are actually moving out and seeking refugee status, or also applying for visa and permanent citizenship in other part of the world, basically to evade the difficulties at the place of origin. And so therefore these political factors do play a very significant role as far as people's decision to move to other places or not. So for example, in places where democracy is thriving, where there is a rule of law, where there is pluralism, diversity and political stability, are actually centers of attraction, and a lot of people choose to go to such locations. So a lot of people are coming to India, a lot of people going to Europe and elsewhere where there are better economic opportunity, robust governance and political systems, where the wage rates are very good. So for example, a medical doctor trained in maybe India would be making some salary, but the same person with the same kind of skills and education and training would get a better wage rate in some other part of the world. So would of course have an incentive to move to a location where he can make a better living for himself and the family, and of course the standard of living would improve. So these are also important factors which really influences people's decision to move. And again, with demographic factors and social infrastructure are very key. If you look at the recent demographic changes, of course in global south a lot of people are facing this problem of increasing population growth, but the happy news is that the rate of population growth has been coming down, and therefore what is happening, due to the changing age structure of population in global south, we are now moving towards the problem of population aging, which is going to be a huge challenge for developing nations, as it is also a big challenge in case of the industrialized world or in the developed world. But because these developed nations have, relatively speaking, higher economic assets and better social welfare schemes, so they are still in a better circumstances as far as meeting the increasing cost of social security, healthcare expenses for older people. But when it comes to developing nations, this changing age structure means that we have to take care, on the one hand, of the young people to give them livelihood, skills, better opportunities. And at the same time, we also have to think about older population who are aging, and which also involves a lot of healthcare cost. And so therefore, these migration decisions are very key and would depend on these combination of factors. So places which are aging today in the world, mostly in the Western societies, are also places where there is a huge scarcity of labor force. So therefore a lot of these Western societies are regulating policies of migration. So most of these in Europe, in America, and in East Asian economies, which are advanced economies, and they are looking for trained, skilled people, are regulating the inflow of people, because they want to ascertain that they only welcome people from all part of the world, but at the same time they would like to filter and find people who are skilled, equipped, young enough to come and work for them, of course at cheaper rate as compared to the native citizens. But even then it is a good deal for both the migrant from the global south who are coming to global north, because they have a better prospect of economic opportunities, social life, quality life, and stability in life. And likewise, it is also a good deal for the global north, because they are able to get young, talented, skilled workforce, which helps to boost the economic prospects. At the same time, also involves a lot of cultural exchange, and that's how the global society moves forward. There are also, as I discussed briefly, the important role of ecological factors, and these ecological factors have increased in prominence in recent times. For instance, as I said, this includes the ecological disasters, desertification. So what is happening is that as people are moving to urban centers, we are looking for greater land use transformation. We are looking for more cities, more opportunities for people to settle in urban settlements, and this can only happen by clearing the natural land covers. And so therefore what is happening is the desert are extending, their extent is rising because of huge pressure on agriculture, livestock, animal rearing, grazing, and everything. And of course we are also heavily dependent upon forest and food products from this forest. So essentially, because of these transformation of the land use, the desertification process is becoming very significant, and thus huge pressure on the natural resources on the one hand. And similarly, with population of course rising, in 1950 we were roughly around 2.5 billion people at the global level. Today we have crossed 8 billion mark. By 2050 we are expected to be close to 9 billion people. So with this almost 3-time increase in the global population in the 100-year expected 2050, there has to be there will be of course a lot of stress on natural resources, and one of them of course is water, and supply of water has become very, very stressful issue for countries across the globe. And so therefore a lot of people have to think about supply of water if they have to settle down in any place. So water stress is going to drive a lot of migrations, and in this way this is an important ecological fact. Traditionally also we know that the human civilizations have thrived in location close to river valleys, essentially because of the supply of water, greenery, food for the livelihood and the livestock. And as human numbers have multiplied several times, the supply of water have not increased, and rather it has come down. So there is of course very limited water which is directly amenable for human consumption, but even that number has been coming down. So for example, if you take case of India post Green Revolution, of course the production of agriculture products has increased, and we have been able to take care of our rising population number, but our water reservoirs are not increasing in number, neither the quantity of water in the reservoir is increasing. So most of these countries in the global north and south need to think about innovative ways of recharging these waters. Unfortunately, with rapid urbanization, what is happening is there is a huge concretization, and opportunities for the natural rainwater to percolate and go to aquifers is coming down. And similarly with deforestation, we are making this natural process of precipitation and hydrological cycle difficult. The net result is that we are increasing the problem of human migration, and these environmental stress actually calls for very concerted environmental policies, particularly in the developing societies, because these are the countries in the world where population number are expected to increase in the future. And these are the places where basic questions of life, livelihood and environment persist. And so therefore we need to have a very collective and very strong policy making to protect the environmental and natural resources. Otherwise, what is going to happen is, this problem of desertification. With deforestation, we are seriously going to face huge stress of water supply, and of course the health of the soil is also not improving because of the stress of global population rise and the demand for food. The land, availability of land and the quality of soil, both are under huge stress. And so therefore what is happening is that the quality of the soil is deteriorating and the health of the soil is deteriorating. And as you know, if the soil is beyond repair, the quality of the soil and health of the soil is beyond repair, the future food supply and food security would again be a huge problem. And even today, for example, in a country such as in India, which is doing economically and socially well for last 75 years, we still find that large proportion of our children and our women are facing the problem of undernutrition. So of course this is a multifactorial issue, but this again confirms the fact that if the concerted environmental policies are not in place, then the prospect of human well-being is at huge risk. And there is also a related concept of migration flows and migration stock. So the decision of the family or the clan and the information flows in media. So if you look at the migration process, people tend to move from different stream, from one place origin and one place of destination. And then we have this this diaspora, the community which are living in other places. I think diaspora is very significant, and for example the Indian community which has migrated to different part of the world are playing a very important role as an ambassador of Indian ethos, Indian culture, Indian traditions. So wherever if the Indian people are moving abroad, they find opportunities, and these opportunities are then connecting people abroad, and therefore they are creating a platform wherein Indian business, Indian economic opportunities, Indian culture is thriving and prospering. And related issue is also the issue of remittances. I think remittances play a very critical role in the economic growth of several developing nations across the world. So a lot of people who are migrating from developing nations to the Western societies, they tend to send back a lot of remittances. And it is just not important at the international level, rather even in the case of national economies, the remittances are really very critical for the native states or the place of destination. Place of origin from where the people have migrated. So for example, in the empowered action group states like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, a lot of people who are working in other part of country or maybe abroad, they are sending back remittances, economic monies and values. They are very valuable for the growth of these places of origin. So therefore these remittances are very critical, and which signify that this migration is important both for the places of origin and also for the place of destination. If you look at migration can also be studied on the basis of places of origin and places of destination in terms of the streams. And in India the migration is actually measured by a few questions which is asked by the Census of India. So for instance, there are questions such as the question of place of birth. Then they also ask question like place of your last residence, then the duration of your stay at the place of usual residence, and the place of your residence at a fixed prior date. So these four questions are largely used in the Census of India to get a sense of whether a person is a migrant at the time of census enumeration or not. And so these questions help us to understand the stream of migration in the country. So if you look at the stream of migration, there are basically few classifications. The first is of course people moving from rural to rural areas. So in case of India, this is a very prominent forms of migration, largely because marriage driven. Of course in India, because of the cultural diversity, we have different forms of marriages. Predominantly we have marriages wherein women tend to move after marriage to the place of the husbands or the grooms, and so that involves a permanent shift in the place of residence. So therefore people tend to move from one village to the other village, and this involves migration from rural to rural areas. There are of course other responsible reasons, which is, for example, rural areas. There is also a problem of a lot of caste and religious struggle, and that also sometimes is related for people to move from one place to other. And finally, the limited economic opportunities in the rural areas, where people tend to move from smaller villages where there are fewer opportunities to villages which are of larger sizes with diverse economic function, as compared to the place of origin at the villages which are relatively smaller. And so therefore people move from rural to rural areas. Now the second important form is of course rural to urban migration, which has achieved a lot of relevance in the recent times, and it largely involves the movement of people for economic reasons, and so for example, daily wage earners, laborers tend to move from rural to urban areas, and this is a very important form of migration that we have seen. And of course some of them also are related to marriage related reasons. The third one is of course from urban to urban areas. So mostly what happens, like people who are working in some smaller cities or towns, they tend to update themselves, acquire new skills, get exposure, experience in a particular field, and then they excel and they acquire new skills, and then they find that the wage rate at which they are working at the present urban settlement is probably not meeting to their advanced experience and skill set, and therefore they look for opportunities in larger or bigger cities and towns, and which involves the urban to urban migration. And now, as I said in the some few minutes ago, that this has now emerged as a very important and prominent stream of human migration. Gradually, as large population living in the urban centers, people are moving from smaller cities and town to bigger cities in town, largely because of the higher wage rates and better quality of life. And finally, the fourth stream is urban to rural migration. So it happens essentially at the time of retirement, where the laborer has done his or saturated his service time or business time, and now looking for retired life in going back to native places in the rural areas. And so therefore this is how this urban to rural migration happens. So in this way we have discussed about what is migration, how migration is related to demographic transitions, and of course we have looked at some of the salient factors which are responsible for human migration.